Ah,
Go.
let's go.
Hey guys, everybody knows Frank Morelli, Todd Phillips, and so grateful that you both are doing this, and it's just fantastic. And I'm just going to get out of the way and let you guys take over. And thank you so much for doing this.
A
All
pleasure.
pleasure. Anyway,
Frank, you want
so
to start off?
I guess I could,
Yeah.
Todd. We have put together, first of all, Todd and I have been, well, I've been in the Orpheus Chamber Orchestra. Today's topic is about playing, really, chamber music, playing without a conductor. Playing with a conductor is not much different, but all of the responsibilities that we especially have to have when we play without one. I've been playing with Orpheus for over 40 years. And Todd's younger than I am, so I don't know how long it is for
Yeah,
you.
well, I'm a relative newcomer because I started in 1982, so it's only 38.
Oh, baby.
Yeah.
He's a junior member of the firm. Anyway, so we've been on, actually next year in April, I heard actually from one of our colleagues, Ronnie Bausch, a violinist, that Deutsche Grammophon is putting out a 50 CD set of Orpheus recordings.
Wow, I'm going to get
Five
that.
zero,
I'm going to get
five
that.
zero. And Todd and I were on a lot of those
A
together.
lot of them. Wow,
Yeah.
that's a lot though. Gee.
Yeah, who knew? Yeah, anyway, so we put a few things into a PowerPoint because it's easy to work that way. And we have, well, I'll show you what we got. So I'm going to share the screen and run a little bit of this, a couple of slides. You'll see, it's all brief stuff. So first I will share the screen, see if I can do it without making a total mess of things. I think I did it. And computer sound. And
Oh yeah.
see that? And then I have to go to slideshow. I'm becoming a regular pro at this stuff.
Jeez, you're so
And
high
from
tech.
the, look at that, high tech is me. So anyway, I just made a cover slide. But anyway, here's the first thing we wanted to show you. It's a little brief video about a concert, a performance we did a few years ago when we first played Beethoven's Fifth Symphony in Carnegie Hall. I mean, who's ever played Beethoven's Fifth in Carnegie Hall? Only everybody. So anyway, here's a little bit about, oops, I just remembered something. I'm going to stop the share for 1 second because, and there's one thing that I have to do is enable content. If you don't do it, it won't run. We're back again. Sorry about that. You can see, one moment, another moment. I'm going to make sure I'm doing this right. Yeah, this time it's really going to work, I assure you.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure it will. 1 moment, please. Slideshow from the start. And please let me know if you can hear this.
It's an imposter. My hair color's different.
Can you hear it? You can hear it,
For the
right?
opening night of our Carnegie Hall season, we'll begin the program with Rossini's overture to the Italian Girl in Algiers, followed by a new work, Earth Echoes, commissioned by Orpheus from the great American composer Augusta Reed Thomas, which will be sung by Sasha Cook and Nathan Gunn. The ending work on the program is nothing less than Beethoven's Symphony No. 5.
This is the first time we've played this Beethoven Fifth Symphony. What's exciting for us as a group is, you get to have your hands on this piece, as this organization does with different war horses of the repertoire. We apply our chamber music principles to rehearsing everything that we do, obviously, but the opportunity to do that with a Beethoven symphony is really very rewarding for all of us. I mean, we have both the orchestral grandeur in mind, but also have the flexibility of a chamber orchestra at the same time. That in its biggest moments, we can feel like a big symphony orchestra, and at its most intimate moments, we can feel like it's more of a chamber ensemble. And I think that mix is kind of unique.
It's interesting that this piece we associate with a certain kind of massive orchestra sound, which with 38, 39 musicians on stage, we're not going to be trying to replicate. The energy and certainly the sense of volume is going to be there, but not this kind of mass that we associate when we hear the opening figure, da 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 da. Hear something so big and loud and full. Ours is going to be something that's more flexible. But the advantage is that really inherent in the score is this really demand for a kind of nimbleness and a reactiveness. And to be working on it as we are now in the context of our own individual musicians making the decisions about the piece, really deciding for ourselves how this piece really should go, is very gratifying. It's what we do at Orpheus. That's how we make music. So despite the fact that we all associate this piece with so many great conductors and great orchestras, we really feel that this is the perfect piece for Orpheus.
So that's just to give the people watching a little bit of a sense of how we look, what we do. And so I just need to move this out of the way. Over the years, we've coached a number of groups as members of Orpheus or individually, a number of unconducted groups. As you notice, we didn't say anything about not having a conductor. It's not a question of overthrowing the authority of a conductor, especially when you have someone who's a great musician like Jamie. But the fact is, it's a different experience. And I could tell you that what I've learned playing in Orpheus for over 40 years, I've brought to playing in conducted orchestras. And the idea of being much more aware of what's going on throughout the orchestra and not being as focused on my own part. So we have put some points together, as you could read for yourself. Although we're interconnected, each individual's experience is different. And Todd could talk about this. The first point about how the concertmaster and section leaders, especially up front, bear extra leadership responsibility, but they then must be open to suggestions and criticisms and even change their own previously thought of approach to the piece.
Yeah, sometimes in rehearsal, being concertmaster, you often feel like a traffic cop because the entire group is, of course, welcome to make comments, and it is a little bit more organized than it used to be in that we sort of let the section leaders talk more of the time. And if you're sitting in the back of the section, you bide your time and choose your moments wisely so that the short rehearsal time isn't reduced to chaos. But even so, in any given rehearsal, you have comments coming from all over the group, and sure, when we come to rehearsal, as concertmaster, I have a lot of ideas of what I think should happen, and certainly from a leading standpoint, you have to be very convinced of what you're doing, but you do have to be incredibly receptive to other ideas and try to adapt them really quickly so that a rehearsal could disintegrate into just kind of back and forth and arguing and this and that. And it's not so much about compromise as it is sort of making a performance adding on of experiences that everybody suggests. And so being sort of the focal point, very often being up in the front and trying to sort of put that together and lead it and take that in, yeah, it takes a lot of opening up your brain and your ears, but at the same time, it's you learn a lot really fast.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, well, first of all, whenever I see who's going to be leading, first of all, we should point out in Orpheus, there's no principal player. The winds all rotate. You might say we split the book, as the saying goes. We have at least 8 different violinists that can be concertmaster at any given time. If we do a concert with 4 pieces, there's very likely 4 different concertmasters. So there's also no hierarchy in that regard. So people are rotating throughout the orchestra. Todd could be leading Beethoven Symphony and sitting first violin or second out of 6 on the next piece or the previous piece. In fact, he's likely to be, the way I've noticed the rotations go. But I can say, I mean, Todd plays, you probably know this, plays in the Orion Quartet, among other things, but it's a long career in the Orion Quartet. And so for me, if I see there's a Beethoven symphony or a work of Brahms or Schumann, and Todd's leading it, I think, well, we're set. He's somebody who's used to sitting in a quartet, playing this repertoire. No, seriously, I feel like you eat that for breakfast. And Todd's leading this. And Todd also has a sense of humor and a little bit of patience, and he has a way of keeping us going, but keeping it in a way lighthearted. And that really, in a way, speaks to the next 2 comments, which are written here, where you know, it's like any good society, you know, the golden rule should be in play. You treat others the way you'd like to be treated. So we have ideas. I have every reason to think that I would hope that my idea would be considered seriously and respectfully. I have to offer my criticism seriously or my idea seriously and respectfully. And we do that for each other, that it be taken seriously. But I also have to be prepared for people to say, well, that's not really the way we want to do it this time. And one can't be resentful of that or whatever. And there are times when I've offered an idea, and as soon as we actually try it, I'm the first one to say, bad, I forget it. I'm sorry, I mentioned that. That didn't really help things. So we do that for each other. We do that for each other. And one would do that in a duo, a quartet, a quintet, a chamber orchestra. One has to have that kind of respect. And that's the only way we'll operate properly. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's a given in any chamber ensemble, really, that's how you really have to behave, and that's how you have to interact. So of course it's magnified in a big group like Orpheus, but certainly all these same things are what quartet players or piano trios, or, you know, just anybody that's in a group, particularly one that has you know, long-standing relationship with each other. It's super important, and as you mentioned, the sense of humor goes a long way.
No, we have a good time, but we get the job done. But we do. We're most of the time laughing and not scowling. And
by the way,
yeah.
We wanted to make sure to mention that if anybody has a question throughout, you don't have to wait until the end when we do Q&A or something. If anyone has anything to offer or ask during, you know, any time during this hour, please go ahead. And I think the procedure was to put something in the chat, and then someone will figure out how to.
Yeah, at the moment, I can't see the chat with my screen taking up. Maybe the same is true for you all. So maybe even somebody, you can see it, great. So you can keep an eye on it, because I have the PowerPoint thing going. So on to the next page of helpful hints. This is one that poor Todd has gotten, the strings have gotten out of us forever in the back, because we have, in a way, it's great for Todd and I to be doing this together, because Todd is often in the very front and I'm most often in the very back. And one of the things which I think it took the strings a while to realize, because, and I can understand why, is when you're sitting up front and all the music is coming at you, you're getting a lot of information all the time. And it's quite a different experience to sit in the back. And so, as Todd has heard me complain for close to 40 years, if it's 38 for him, is our request for leadership, physical leadership from up front in order to stay with them, right? And like I say, what seems very apparent to them, and tempo, ensemble, even discussion, speaking during rehearsal is not so apparent to us in the back. And so physical leadership is really important. But at the same time, and I hasten to add this because it is not a one-way street, through score study, I have to be aware of, to be able to ask and just say, and often with me it would be, you saw the cellist John Spitz speaking on that, along with Todd, most of it was the two of them. And as a bassoonist, obviously viola and cello bass would be sort of my constituency often. And there are many times when I'm saying up to asking John, or whoever's leading the cello section on that piece, where with you, or he's looking back at me and saying, Frankie, letter D, keep an eye. And so we do that back and forth. So it's not just me complaining about you didn't move enough. I have to be, have studied the score, be mindful, be aware of what's going on so that we can do it. And I know Todd and I have many times in rehearsal and in performances looked up at each other and I certainly am looking at him with an appreciation, and I'd like to think the look I'm getting back is the same. We keep a pretty good communication, I'd say, in the course of the performance. And then on to some other things here. Sorry about that. I have to keep moving us out of the way here a little bit. That we all share the responsibility, which goes to what we were just talking about a little bit. We are all, as I say when I've introduced this concept to groups of musicians, young musicians at different festivals or colleges, is to say, this performance will be as good as you want it to be. There's nobody up there telling you what to do, or the only one person as the standard bearer, and therefore we all have a responsibility to study and to prepare prior to the first rehearsal. And so one of the things we have is everyone has their parts in advance, and everyone has access to the scores. And these days, a lot of times it's PDFs that were sent to you, and certainly hard copies, you might say, when we're together. And one of the things I like to describe it as, I'm sure Todd thinks the same, is, you have to look at, especially when you're playing without the conductor, is looking at the score horizontally as well as vertically. So for me, when I'm figuring out where I'm going to be needing information from, if I look vertically at any moment up and down the score, I can see who am I with, who am I supporting. If I'm not playing at that very moment, say if I'm in the middle of rests, who should I be listening to keep my place, you might say, not just counting bars, but staying in the flow of the music. Of course, by getting the score horizontally, we think about the direction of the music. So, that's, say, a bassoon player in the back. What do you look for, Todd? Like when you're getting ready to lead us in Beethoven 5, how do you go about getting ready for that? That's a job, it seems to me.
Yeah. Well, sorry, that's my steam heater.
Oh, okay. At least you have heat. That's good.
Yeah. Well, certainly, studying a score like you do in any piece, is really getting to know how it's put together and who has what and all that. One of the challenges is that, sure, I'd love to be able to watch the score and play at the same time, but it's impractical from what we do because my stand partner would have to be turning pages only, or of course these days I guess we could use the iPad with the foot pedal and all that stuff, but I find it also it happens often enough that because, as Frank was describing, that we have to look at one another quite a bit. So I look at the music, and then I look at somebody else, and then I come back, and it's hard to find my place again. So a lot of the pieces that we know, that we rehearse a lot, I know kind of a lot of it from memory at this point, but I do mark in things that I wouldn't necessarily mark in if it was just a quartet. So, Frankie, I know that you have some really good things coming up in this presentation about some examples of what you've marked in your part. But certainly, from my standpoint, from leading a piece, I really have to remind myself, okay, this is with bassoon, this is with horn, this is with cello. I mean, I know that, but at the same time, you don't have to remember, because you're not looking at the score, You're looking at your part, which is too limited. So I always ask for the actual part that we're going to use before the set of concerts or the set of rehearsals happens, so that not just to practice from it, but actually to mark all that kind of stuff in. I certainly do that in chamber music when it's a complex, usually more contemporary kind of piece where you need to know all the specific, sort of unusual things that are happening in a piece. But something like the Beethoven Fifth Symphony, for instance, I mean, yeah, I know how that goes. I know they have this and that, but it really helps me direct my attention, as Frank was saying, to connect here, and then we have to connect there. And being a big group, sometimes you get a little dizzy, so you want to make sure you know where you're going.
Absolutely. No, I mean that is the case, and it's interesting to hear you say what things are important, and they're really not much different than what I'm writing in. Obviously, you're coming from a different place, whether you're in the violin section or in fact leading the violin section, and I know, like I said, there are many times when I'll be looking up or I'll be playing, and I know I'm there, that this is something for you and I to be together on. And I know John Spitz knows that I'm there, and others, other cellists. They're all excellent. John was in that video, so his name comes to mind at this moment. And even I had thought of things that I most have to write down myself. And this goes, as you said, for any kind of chamber music, especially more involved chamber music, and certainly contemporary pieces, as you said, more nettlesome music in terms of ensemble. In fact, we did one time, I don't think you played this, I'm trying to remember, we did the Elliott Carter clarinet concerto with Charlie Neidig, who was then a member of Orpheus. And we did that without a conductor, Elliott Carter concerto. And I would say, because we were on a little quintet tour, I played in a quintet called Windscape, who was actually recorded with the Orion Quartet, the Bach record. And I spent, and this is not one of these, your father saying exaggerations, like I used to walk 3 miles to school back and forth, uphill both ways or something. But I spent, I'd say, about 7 hours marking my part before the first rehearsal. Because I assure you, had I not put that kind of time in, and it fortunately was on a tour where I was sitting actually on a train, we were using a train to get down around the Washington area and south of there, and not an airplane, which is a little harder to work. So I had the time, and had I not spent that time preparing the part, and as you said, I also ask for the part I'm going to use. Otherwise, I make one up, and that's the one I use. But I'm not going to just mark a different part. I spent that much time, and I assure you, had I not done so, I wouldn't have had much of an idea whether I was in the right place or not when we started rehearsing, let alone who I should be with. So it was required in that. Now, every piece is not that difficult. And the things I've noticed, obviously, what are important things to mark in your part? Certainly group entrances. Like at the beginning, it's not usually too big a surprise that, say, the concertmaster is bringing us in, but it's not always the case. It's not always the case. and not only group entrances at the beginning, but anytime after a fermata, beginning of a movement, things like that. And for us, during or after a long rest, because it's during a rest when you're not playing, when you could potentially be thrown off in terms of where you are in the piece. And about the same thing, like a long rest, is holding a sustained note, which wind players do in symphonies, and knowing when it's over where you're supposed to be. And then, like the motor running, especially in pieces of the classical and romantic era, especially earlier romantic era, where the inner strings, right, Todd, usually second fiddles and violas especially, might be setting up a motor, so to speak, that is driving us all, regardless of concertmaster, whatever. We're all listening to that inside motor. So I encourage you to keep those things in mind when you find yourself in a similar position. And yeah, anyway, Todd, any thoughts that come up? That's it? It was good? Covered it? Yeah, that's okay. I don't mean to, and the physical movement, which we've already talked about before in this next little bit, right?
About physical movement, one of the things that I did learn over all those years is not only what is a good cue, but what are confusing movements and unnecessary ones. Because sometimes not leading and being behind somebody who might be meaning incredibly well and really emoting and all this, but sometimes it can be confusing to watch, and you're not exactly sure what you're looking at. So it can be really worthwhile if one is in that kind of position. And again, this goes for chamber music as well, for quartets, trios, quintets, sextets, that the kind of cue you give or motions that you're giving are really along with the character that you're playing in, and really only the movements that show exactly where you're going to be playing. But I have to say, one of the things I learned from Orpheus in particular is that sure, we played like this with our bow and our violin, but the idea, and of course we try to breathe beforehand, but really we have to understand that a wind player isn't going to go boom like this. That there's a preparation before you even take the quick upbeat breath, right? There's like a boom, and it took me a long time to really take that into account as a bringing in an entire group of people, including winds and brass, and again, it doesn't have to be a huge motion, but there is something where you have to imagine yourself about to play that kind of instrument, and what would you need in order to play the downbeat. And I have to say, when I was a participant of the New York String Seminar, when I was 15, 16, Sasha Schneider used to actually sometimes yell at the horns that they weren't breathing enough. I'm thinking, well, okay, I think they know how to play the horn. But what he was getting at was that in order to even have a convincing downbeat, he says, you don't breathe enough. You must breathe beforehand. God damn you. And then he'd be yelling at them. And, but the idea that there was a natural preparation, which is something that we, also had to follow at the same time, because he's yelling at them to do it. So, okay, well, now we have to play with that too. And I'll never forget that. Of course, Sasha was not an embarrassed person, and he told everybody what he thought, and he had no qualms about telling the horn players how to play the horn.
Yeah, well, I know in chamber music too, there are times when I'll see how string players, you'll be like at the tip of the bow and you just look at each other and you move like that to the next, you know, you move to the, and we say, yeah, well, too late for us, man.
Right.
You know, like we can't, or too early for however you want to put it. It's, you know,
Yeah, I know.
we just can't get in that way. We can't.
Yeah, right. And it took me
And
quite a while to figure out
I,
how to do that together.
how to telegraph that to us. The
Yeah.
other problem that I think you face sometimes that I've noticed is you need to give a clear cue, but the entrance that you need to give is supposed to be very soft, and that must kind of drive you a little nuts that you're giving a cue that which would result in a stronger kind of accent or even sound. So you're giving this big cue, and then
Yeah.
I'm sure it drives you a little.
Well, yeah, when I'm teaching the violin, I'm kind of a proponent of keeping your movements very economical and to not disturb the efficiency of your playing. But when confronted with these very issues, I know that sometimes what's coming out here isn't ideal, and in fact, I'm kind of famous in the group for breaking many hairs on my bow because I'm giving a lot of energy. It's not a precise enough contact because I'm doing a few things more than I would normally, and therefore when you do that, the contact is a little bit messy or something, and sometimes some not very pleasant sounds come out, but it was a necessary movement, and I couldn't quite control it.
Yeah. Got away from you.
So it's always very expensive if I have to lead orchestra. I have to get my bow re-aired.
Yeah, we often have said when we've done more difficult pieces, the cellists often, either John Spitz or Eric Bartlett's another one, we feel like we should all chip in for a massage for them when they're done, because they've been playing the cello and moving so much that we feel we should all treat them to a day at the spa after having had to carry us along literally on their backs. And one of the things I wrote in here, which was not my idea, but I've heard at Orpheans discuss, was this idea of mirroring, that sometimes, let's say the oboe is coming in, but then up front, the people that can see us in the back, who would tend to be the concertmaster and the principal cello, maybe principal viola, maybe principal second, who are more facing, at least can see from the side peripherally, to sort of mirror the cue. So it becomes a group cue, or certainly, and that first of all, adds to precision, but it also adds to a group feeling from a more interpretive point of view, from this feeling of how we're going into the music. And that's a concept that's a good one, because I don't think everyone that would occur to them right away to try to jumpstart groups with some of the ideas that it took us, like you say, a long time to figure out how I'm supposed to do this. And that goes for us too in the back, how we can be with you better,
Right. And doesn't that also apply with orchestras that are playing with conductors?
Oh, totally, absolutely.
Because let's face it, not all conductors are super clear. Some of them are, but each orchestra learns how to play together and then interpret what the conductor wants. But some of those exact same skills, I think, apply to any orchestra, so that sometimes it might be the concertmaster's kind of job to translate a little bit what's happening up there. But if the group also has this physical and sort of awareness, this physical way of playing together, I know that it happens. My dad played in the Pittsburgh Symphony for 30 years, and he said they would get inspired by certain conductors, but other times they could just kind of play, and the conductor only had to just sort of guide them a little bit. So anyway, these are certainly applicable concepts to any kind of orchestral playing.
Right. I mean, your career has been much more, you would go from Orpheus back to the quartet, as well as teaching. But in terms of performance, it's probably safe to say the lion's share of it has been playing in a quartet. I, as bassoon player, although I do play in a woodwind quintet and do other chamber music, I would go back to more conducted orchestra playing. I was principal in the City Opera for 27 years, New York City Opera, and as well as been in the American Composers Orchestra since it was founded, et cetera. But I can tell you that I do use those same skills that we use in Orpheus, and we encourage everyone listening to use them. It's not about everyone being in their own sort of carol, like the study carols in libraries, just looking at the conductor and playing. It really is a group activity of playing together and playing under the guidance of the conductor. And that leads to the best performance. It's not a blind reliance on what you see in front of you from the podium. It's both. And like I said, Orpheus is not about bringing down the icon of the conductor. It's a different way of making music, in some ways different. And I know I've benefited from that in my life. I mean, as a musician, from having to go there, having to be that aware as a player, as interpreting things and not just relying on someone else to carry the ball. Now, the next thing we have here, and so it says here on this page, which we've already been talking about, basically you do these same principles if you were going to get together with someone to play duets. It would still be the same, being aware of what the other person has and everything else about it, all the way up to playing in a symphony, philharmonic orchestra, or opera or ballet orchestra, and everything in between. So these skills are just good musicianship, and but they certainly relate to our topic today. That of playing large ensembles without conductors. Now, the next thing I have here that I did is, for this was done actually, as I recall, for I think it was Stony Brook, where I'm on the faculty. I think they were doing Beethoven's Second, or wherever it was. I prepared these pages. Looks like plays for a football or basketball game. But I wanted to show the students, and show you again today, all the stuff that could be going on while you're playing the opening of Beethoven's Second Symphony. That's like the Fifth Symphony, but this is something I had done and thought it was useful. Sorry, it's a little bit sloppy, but I did my best to try to make it legible. And so I have a recording up of Beethoven's Second with Leonard Bernstein in Vienna. I'm not going to, we're only going through basically through a good part of the intro, introduction, the slow part before the get into the actual body of the piece. And I'm not going to move to the next screen when you get to the bottom of the second page, because as I've learned, the music will turn off. So I'm just going to let it play a little bit, then I'll get out of it and we can discuss it. So here's the beginning of the Beethoven Second Symphony. Let me get it to sort of the beginning. Okay, we're going to stop there. Of course, it's hard to stop. Such great music, and Leonard Bernstein, Vienna Philharmonic, you can't go wrong. So that's as much as I had marked up, which I think was plenty to say in the matter of, well, that says 1:53, and he didn't start till about beat the second number 13. So this is 1:40 worth of music, and there's all of these cues written in. I'm not saying each one of these cues would be in, for instance, the concertmaster's part, but to point out to you how it works. So at the beginning, obviously, it's a tutti, and be no surprise to think that Todd, if Todd were leading this, he'd be bringing us in. But then there's a fermata, after which, as you saw Leonard Bernstein, he then brought in the oboes and bassoons. So I've used these arrows like to say, well, first of all, we'd have to decide who's cutting us off. And then as a bassoonist, I would most definitely be following the oboes. So that's why you see the arrows sort of pointing us up at the oboes. And we play our measures.
And the oboes would have to give a very definitive cue of how they're playing those first notes, and in particular the first note, so that you can follow, right?
Exactly.
I mean,
And so
even if there is a conductor giving that beat, really to play together, you want to see out of the side of your eye, right? That
oh, most definitely.
oboe
If I'm
going up and boom, right? Yeah.
most definitely, if I were playing this with, and I got to play for a few seasons with Jamie in the Westchester Philharmonic up in just north of New York City, which was an absolute gas to get to make music with him that way after having played chamber music with him and coached at the string seminar. It was just so enjoyable to make music with him. I can't even tell you. But, and he's a wonderful conductor, but we keep an eye on each other. As a bassoonist, so I'm a pretty strong personality. I think Todd would agree. I feel my job, he says, no comment. My job is really to be supporting the clarinet, who I believe is sort of our squadron leader for our row, although in Orpheus they often sit in front of me, but still in compositional style. And then we also are in with the oboe and flute, obviously. So those kinds of connections that Todd's talking about, we do all the time, whether or not there's a conductor. And then here you see the flute would join us. So they would have to know they're joining in with the oboe, and they're sitting next to each other. So they're together. And at the very end of that, we pick up Todd again on our way back to the return of the opening chord.
Right. And I would be very aware of how you're playing those dum ba bum da dum dum dum. That there's a bum da dum. So now I have to breathe like that. I have to do a motion, not just da da. Not too angular, but actually something that's in your rhythm in a way, to make it feel like it joins.
Exactly.
And but then the motion that you actually have to play has to be quite energetic and strong. So it's like you have to be both people. I have to be you guys, and I have to be, now the rest of it. Dun, dun. Likewise at the very beginning, the very opening. This is a perfect example of what we were talking about before, where I can't just go dun, dun, because no way.
Yeah.
You have to gather the whole group together and then give something sharp.
Exactly. And you're great at it, to tell you that. But anyway.
Well,
Yeah. And then, of course, Todd continues with what the oboes did before. Todd, the strings, sort of the quartet of players, I'm sure, are all kind of together, but Todd would be leading it, and all of your colleagues in and around you would be joining in. And then we join back in. We have to know, like I wrote here, with violin 1, the arrow's pointing down. We then join. You can't be waiting for us, although sometimes you have to, but we try not to make you. And we have to join in with what it is you're already doing.
right. And in my part, I would have put winds on that beat.
Absolutely.
Even I know you come in, but still, it's like, just make sure you connect.
Oh, absolutely. And in that heat of the moment with everything going on, you don't want to miss that. So you write a cue. Now,
Yeah.
the thing about cues are you may really not need them, especially after the first couple of rehearsals, but
Yeah,
you never know when you might.
that's right.
You never know when you might. And sometimes in a performance, many of my cues are going by, and all they are, and it's very useful for the performance nonetheless, confirmation that I'm in the right place. Gives me a sense of confidence and focus that, yep, things are going well. Everybody's doing what I expect them to do, and I can remain more proactive, more activist in the way I'm playing, and not sort of sitting back to make sure uh, things are not going awry, in which case I can't necessarily do my best work, add the best contribution to what's going on.
Mm.
Then the violins have this more involved rhythmical thing with triplets for the first time at the end. I'm sure the horns would know I didn't write it, wouldn't write it in my own part because, but then we know there's a downbeat. And one of the things, well, you'll see in my bassoon part, because I wrote a few things in, the horns then must take over on the second eighth of this bar. After Todd brings us to a cadence, and then they join in. And so I think this is a mirroring situation where you're probably looking at the first horn or horns, they're looking at you, and you're together sort of leading the way. Is that true? Probably, right?
Yeah, and I would write that in, even though I know that's what happens, but I'd write it in anyway. Yeah.
Right? Then the oboe and bassoon, here we are again. I'm keeping an eye on the oboe, even though so often I'm with the clarinet in Beethoven symphonies. Well, this is an earlier one too. His style changed over time. But, and then flute and violin. So I'm sure Todd would be keeping the hairy eyeball, as they say, on flute. You'd know that that was happening.
Yep.
Oboe and bassoon answer you, and that goes on, sort of back and forth and back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're back to another group chord. And so again, Todd has to take on, well, you could describe it, you already did, but so you're actually at rest for a moment.
Thank goodness, it's much easier to do that than to do it while you're playing.
And
It's like what you were
then,
describing before. Sometimes you have this note, and then you give a cue. It's like, it makes this nasty noise. So you try not to do that. But it's
yeah.
nicer when you don't have to play.
And here the lower strings, second fiddles and lower strings, would have to know, don't be looking for Todd at this moment for the leadership.
Mm,
He doesn't play there. The first violins don't play.
right.
So they would have to be, I didn't write it in, but their eyeballs, their arrow would be heading up in our direction. And then Todd would jump back on the train, or at the front of the herd of the team of horses, and bring us into the next section. And here's an example of the motor. Then the motor starts. And here, Todd has to really be aware of what they're doing, right? I mean, you then really play on the bed of what they provide you, I imagine, right?
Yep. Yep.
And that goes on. And then here, like the bassoon, we must be aware, for precision's sake, listening to the first violin and watching the first violin to make sure that we can get off. And this is very easy for us to get behind. This is one of those moments where I'm watching you like a hawk there, Todd, because
And asking me to move a bit.
yes, and asking to move a bit, as rare a question as that request as that might be. Ha ha ha. And so that we can get off and remain where we should be.
Yeah.
And sorry, this is going the wrong way here.
And just
And then,
to jump in for
yeah,
one
please.
apparently we have to wrap it up in about 5 minutes. I just wanted to encourage anybody that has any questions to get them in there before we have to stop.
Yes, right. We can stop anytime. So you get the idea. This goes on with similar issues. And you can see in the bassoon part, which I marked much more than I might in a few things, but some of the analogous spots, like here with the oboe, flute comes in, that horn where they start on the second beat, with the oboe, the 30-second notes, with the flute, but make sure I stay with the cellos. That's exactly a lot of the same markings you saw in the score are the types of things I would put in my part. So that's really the presentation, and it would be great to have any questions. We're ready.
All right, it says, thank you. I was hoping to ask a question about repertoire choice. Uh, you mean how do we choose repertoire, or do you have a more specific question than that?
Yes, hi, thank you.
Ah,
Oh, actually,
That's okay. Hello.
hi, thank you so much.
hey.
This has been wonderful. Yeah, I was just wondering if there are certain pieces of repertoire that you would not consider attempting with a conductorless orchestra, or if anything is possible.
Good question.
Well, Todd, I remember one time I thought we had hit our Waterloo, and that was the Baird Concerto
Oh
for
my God.
you and dear Peter Serkin. And we were on the stage at Carnegie Hall, and that's for violin, piano, and winds. And none of the outside sponsors of concerts would take it, so we had only one performance, which was in Carnegie Hall. Usually we try to have a tour, like have Carnegie, something like Carnegie come after a few performances, which makes it even tighter. And we had a performance of that piece in Carnegie, and the day of the concert, we were still having trouble getting off the first page.
We had so many rehearsals. That was a piece that maybe I would not do again without it. As good as everybody was, But I mean, in general, the repertoire was. Now we have this sort of committee, and things are kind of. Which is a rotating position. We have a program coordinator who kind of does a lot of research and makes suggestions. But we can always make suggestions to the sort of committee, whoever's in it at the moment, and sometimes they take them into account. And of course, we have to take into account auspices requests and things like that. But over the years, I think when I was first playing, let's say in the 80s, we never would have attempted one of these really big symphonies, like Beethoven 5 or 7 or something like that. But then after a while, we thought, well, maybe we can. And little by little, it got bigger. But it used to be we wouldn't go bigger than a sort of a Haydn symphony, right?
That's true. We kind of developed our skills over time and felt that way. And as Todd is describing, it's interesting now when I coach, for instance, at the National Orchestral Institute, where they'll do a week without conductor. They do pieces, and these are groups, just ad hoc groups put together for the occasion, from students who got in, that we would not have dreamed of doing in those first 20 years, But they do them, and they do a great job in 1 week. And the first rehearsal is often like gulp, and we try to help them along in the rehearsal process. But we've never failed. We've always risen to the occasion. And we've done every Beethoven symphony except the 9th.
And the 6th we never did.
Oh, no, we never did the 6th. Bummer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Somehow I think never got around to it. But yeah, we've done all
Oh,
the
okay. And we've done Brahms piano concertos and Brahms violin concerto, Beethoven violin concerto.
Right.
I'll never forget the performance we did of that after 9/11. And everything closed down because of the attack on 9/11. And the opening night of Carnegie got pushed back, and we became the opening night. And we did the Beethoven violin concerto with Itzhak Perlman in Carnegie Hall as the first performance back after that tragedy. And, that's a historic occasion in my mind. My wife and son were in the audience, and as the concert was over, an older man said to our son, he says, "You'll never forget this day," And the Beethoven violin concerto is pretty big. It's a pretty big piece.
Yeah.
The Emperor Concerto is a big piece. There are certain of even Beethoven pieces for concerti that are, we've done 4 or the other ones a lot.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So after a while, it just, in the earlier days, it felt like we couldn't expand, particularly in a way, the string section too far back because it was too cumbersome. So apparently we do have to stop.
Oh, I
But
thought we had, okay.
yeah,
No, that's good.
but this was fun, Frank. Great to see you.
Likewise, Todd.
And we encourage everybody to just, if you get the opportunity to do something like this, and just plunge in.
Exactly. And learn, plunge in and learn.
And learn
Be
from
good
each
to
other.
each other. Be good to each other
Yeah.
in the process. Okay, well, I know we have told you have rehearsals to go to.
Right.
And we hope you enjoyed it.
Thanks, everybody. We're getting
Take care, Todd.
You too, Frank.
All right.
All right. Merry
everybody.
holidays and happy New Year.
Happy, and all of that. Yes, to everyone. Be safe. Be careful.
Right. Be careful.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.